peace and blessing, love and light. And welcome to the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. Join us as we navigate in new spaces using our mental, physical, and spiritual toolboxes to create our peaceful existence. Sit back, relax, and get ready to be inspired to transition and be transformed. I am your host, Kim Martin Raymond. Let's dive into the How Now. Hello. Peace and blessings, love and light, and welcome to this edition of the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. I'm your host, Kim Martin Raymond, and I'm a minister, spiritual life coach, holistic nutritionist, author, and founder of Redefining You LLC, where I help my clients to realign themselves, mind, body, and spirit. And welcome to the show. If you are new here, please make sure that you go to my brand new website, KimMartinRaymond.com, to find out all things Kim Martin Raymond. Find out about the How Now podcast, find out about spirit body transformation, where I help to coach those who are looking to increase their health and body, and also all things going on my products and services. Check out my new line of apparel that I have coming out, the How Now t-shirt, and also I have a hoodie and a mug. So make sure that you go to my website, KimMartinRaymond.com. Okay, before we get into tonight's show, this has been a year of execution. This is season 6 of the How Now podcast, and we've been talking about doing things in a way that are going to manifest the things that we focused on last year. Last year, we talked about the 365-day challenge, where we challenge people to create healthy habits, mind, body, and spirit. And this year, again, is about execution. And as we've gone through this year, we have talked about 4 different segments of the show. We've had special co-hosts that have come on to assist with hosting me in the show throughout the year. And like I said, we're in month 7, and I'm excited about all that we've shared so far. We've had a segment on spirit body transformation, and that's where I'm sharing fitness, nutrition, and mindset ideals and tips, as you're going through your wellness journey. And then we have the 12 spiritual principles with Dr. Reginald Howard, and he is highlighting a spiritual principle, one spiritual principle a month, and then he highlights a spiritual luminary that embodies that spiritual principle. And then we have the financial fitness segment, and that's with Leah Garcia, and she is the dynasty builder. And she talks about creating generational wealth, not just for yourself, but for your family and your legacy as well. And then we have a 4th segment that we'll be talking about tonight, which is living your purpose. And I'm going to go ahead and bring my wonderful co-host on stage. And as is customary with the How Now podcast, I'm going to have him introduce himself at this time and talk about what we're going to be talking about for tonight. Hello, my friend.
Hey Kim, great to be here with you again. We've both been very busy, so it's great for us to catch up. And for me, at least, it's great to kind of pause and reflect. We talked a little bit offline about some things going on in our worlds, and there's always things going on in our worlds, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're challenging. And let me start, I guess, by introducing myself. My name is Jason Jurado. My company is One Path, and it's now One Path Healing, to speak more truly to who I am and what I do. I see clients one-on-one. I do talks like this and things of that nature. The name of my company comes from a Ram Dass quote, which you're probably all familiar with. He says, "We're all just walking each other home." And wherever that home is for you, whatever you call that, that's where we're going. And that's the reality. And regardless of our belief systems, we all are on that journey together. And we're going to end up in that same place. We're returning to our source, whatever that means for you. And, I talk to folks about, people say, well, does that mean there's only one path to get there? And that's exactly the opposite of what I'm saying, that you find your path. There's many trails to the top of the mountain, but the top of the mountain is always the top of the mountain, so to speak, right? And just kind of what came to me based on our conversation this evening was, if you have a plan, it's easier to deal with things as they come up, because life shows up sometimes in different ways. If you're a rudderless boat, it's easy that you get pushed around and you might not find your way. But if you have a direction, you have a focus, you have a vision of life, even when challenging things happen, And there is tragedy that comes into our lives, and that's just one. That's about being alive. That's about being this, having this human experience we're having. But if you kind of have a focus, it helps you to get your feet back on the ground easier. To where if you're kind of just going through life and you're just dealing with things and processing as it shows up, and then something major happens, good or bad, actually, it can throw you for a loop. And then
Yes.
you really find yourself going, wait a minute, well, who am I? Where am I at? What's this journey about? But if the more tools you have prior to what shows up in your life, the better you are. You
That's
know,
right.
I had a major experience in my life where I got blown off course, so to speak, and I had already had some tools in my toolbox. I've been doing this my whole life, this kind of learning and things of that nature. However, I needed more. And I found it very challenging to try to do the readings about pieces every step, TikTok Han. Reading that book when you're just really not in the emotional place can be challenging. So, you know, what we're talking about in the big picture, well, actually in the narrow picture, is using my technique. I help people to get from where they're at to where they want to be. And that we call it the bridge technique. And I'm going to break that down in a second. But in the bigger scope of things, that's what life's all about, is being honest with yourself about where you're at and having a vision of where you want to go. And if you're pointing, if you want to go northwest, you know, and something blows you off to where you're going west, well, you know, I need to course correct back to northwest. I need to move a little more towards the north, so to speak. And so it helps you. But, you know, I just wanted to bring that up because, you know, the beauty about us being able to do these shows every month together is that we have the opportunity not to just kind of share the wisdom, but
Right.
share the wisdom of the day, because that's how life goes, right?
That's
Life,
right.
it shows up differently all the time, and whether it's taking a wonderful vacation or dealing with some tragedy in life, they show up, and it's like,
That's
well, how do
right.
we deal with that? And that's one of the things I love about our conversations, is that we have the opportunity. And I hope that our community can see it, your community can see it,
Yes.
that we're walking the walk as well
That's
as just
right.
talking the talk, you know. And it's like, hopefully I can share some instances that, oh well, this happened and this is what we're doing. So anyway, kind of a long-winded introduction there, but it was really on my mind as we
Oh,
step in
absolutely.
tonight's episode.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, it's always a pleasure to share space with you and to talk about things, and that's the beauty of it. Just like you said, we're experiencing different aspects of our lives, and it is so important that we have the tools that we need to be able to address the things that are going on. And so I love that you talk about the toolboxes. You know, that's a big thing for me. Everything is about toolboxes, and we have different tools that we need to help us to deal with different situations so that we're responding and not reacting to the things that are going on. And that's something that's critical too, that we're gaining wisdom and knowledge about certain things, and we're recognizing when we have to build on those things. And so hopefully, like you said, these segments that we're doing are helping to build us in different areas of our lives that are going to help us, you know, encompass our entire wellness. So, you know, I'm always glad to have you here. And it's always wonderful, like you said, to be able to share stories and to let people know that even as coaches, we need coaching along the way.
Yeah.
And you know, and sometimes we're, you know, not just speaking to our audience, we're speaking over ourselves as well. And so that's the beauty of it. So I'm excited about tonight's conversation and what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah,
Bring
and
us in.
that's so true. Yeah, you know, and you know, for those technical folks that haven't met me yet, my background's in neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, timeline therapy, polyvagal theory. I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher. I found these different modalities over time that tie things together. You know, that I study broader than that, but then I look at things and go, wait a minute, does this tie into who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish? I love to learn about all things, you know, whether it's motorbike racing, which I don't do, or, you know, racing horses, which my dad was into for 30 years, you know, and training horses. But just always getting knowledge. But as far as what I do professionally and what I am as a person, when I see a person in front of me, you know, when I'm just another soul in front of another soul,
Right.
I look at how can I best help them on their journey. You know, because I've said before, I'm just a tour guide. I don't do anything to anybody. I help people along their way.
Right.
And so I look at the things that I can put together that can help them on their journey. Speaking of the journey, real quick, the origin story of my bridge technique. I was talking to someone close to me, and this was a couple of years ago when I was kind of looking at my marketing for my business, and trying to find out, well, who am I, and how can I best explain it to people that I want to see about working with me. And I was talking to her, and she was having her own challenges at that moment, and with just her mental health and things of that nature. And I was excited because I was like, oh, well, what I do is I help people discover their purpose and, live their purpose, and talking about that. And she kind of stopped me and she's like, I can't even hear what you're saying. And I was confused for a second because in my head, it rang true. Everything made sense. And I'd been working on it, and I'd been, digesting this stuff and had this information. I was excited to share. And I took a step back and I listened. And she said, yeah, where I'm at right now, getting up is a challenge. Starting my day can be a challenge, so thinking about, well, what's my purpose, like, sometimes we think of it, this grandiose thing, that we have to have this great plan, and, well, everyone else, and you can find yourself saying, well, everyone else has a plan, why don't I have a plan? That comparison, which is of course the thief of joy, as the saying
That's right.
goes. But it just really struck a note for me to say, that's so true. And even though I'm excited about it, even though that's what my mission is to help people on, because of the story that I went through,
Right.
not being able to live my purpose for 40 plus years. But then I was so excited when I started and on this journey to be able to fully live my life and live my purpose. I wanted to share that. But then I had to take a step back and say, yeah, but you're going to miss the people that you should be helping, because
Mhm.
you're speaking a foreign language to them, and they're
Right.
going to go somewhere else. They're not going to be open maybe to what you have to say. So I took a step back and I said, okay, well, let's look at that then, because what I do is art and a science.
Right.
And so, I know the art, and I say art in the sense of this, the soul and the spirit. That's what I call the art of it. And the science is the technique, is the, well, how does, what's the neuroscience of it, like I study neuroscience too, and what's the psychology of it, and how does our brains work, and what's that doing, and all that, plugging those two together is really what I do. And so I said, well, let's break this down in a way that's digestible, that people can understand it, it makes sense, and it's easier to follow. Because, and the bridge, of course, jumping off of, going through a precipice, you want a bridge. You don't want to just try to take one leap and get from one side of the Grand Canyon to the other. That's not, if you've ever been there, it's amazing, and it's not going to work. So we started with that. I started with a bridge and thinking about the path to transformation. How can we transform? And it's like I said before, going from where you're at to where you want to go. And tonight we were getting to the E. We're getting to the final letter in that. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then also, as we go forward for this year, kind of how these conversations are gonna adjust a little bit for that. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna jump right into the bridge technique. So to honor those that haven't been with us yet, or haven't joined myself and Kim in this process, I'm going to go over, the B, the R, the I, the D, and the G that we've already done on other episodes. But I do highly recommend that if you haven't seen those episodes, you go back, because we definitely go in depth, and there's some
Yes.
great conversations behind this. Kim has so much wisdom that she brings to this, as we share this technique, and having her perspective really helps me as I form this and use this with clients going forward. So I definitely recommend going back and just checking all of her stuff out. She's amazing, you know that.
Oh,
But let's, so starting off with the B, the B is, be aware of your current situation. Where are you at now? So many times in our lives, we can just go, oh, well, I want to be more. I want to be better. Like there's that saying, you do better. Well, okay, that's a comparative. What are we comparing it to? So what you're comparing it to is where you're currently at. That's the start. Where am I? Okay. Recognizing where you are honestly and with self-compassion. It's not about, well, I don't do this and I don't have that. No, nope, nope, nope. Be kind. Be kind to yourself. You are your biggest fan, or should be your biggest fan in this world, and that can be challenging too. And I understand that and I respect that. We're here to go forward, right? We're here to help folks, and ourselves included, as you said, keep moving forward. So let's just start with that. The B is the be aware of your current situation. Being honest with yourself. This is where I'm at. This is where I want to go, and start thinking about that. You might not have a plan, like my friend that wasn't sure about her purpose. That might not be in your head right now, but let's just say, okay, you're not sure of where you want to go, but where are you at? Okay. And let's try to be, and when I work with clients, I give them the opportunity to share the negatives. I give them the opportunity to share what they don't want in their lives. Because after that first session, the rule is we're only going to talk about what you do want in your life from now on.
Right.
So I put that out there. So if you're starting on this journey, hold yourself accountable to that. And if you find yourself saying, well, what do I want? And then you say, well, I don't want this, then ask yourself the question, well, what do I want instead? And that's the start. Okay. That's the B for this bridge technique. And Kim, I'd love to hear a little bit about you, kind of maybe if you want to share a little bit about how that works for you and how that's shown up in your life.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think, when I had the pivotal moment in my life, like I said, for those who don't know, when I lost my youngest daughter, she had a brain aneurysm, and lost my youngest daughter, and this has been almost 17 years ago now, and just remembering that was a turning point, because I was also going through a divorce. I was also empty nesting. My oldest daughter had finished college and had moved on up to New York to be with my family. And for the first time, I was by myself, and I really was looking around, and you know, I at that point realized that I was so defined by the roles that I played, that
Yeah.
when those roles were no longer something that I was engaged in on a daily basis, I was like, okay, so I don't know what to do. Everybody was like, what are you going to do now? What do you want to do? I had no idea, because I was like, well, I'm a mom, and I'm a wife,
Right.
and I'm a worker bee, and I'm all of that. I was checking off all these things that I was, but I
Yeah.
didn't know who I was. And so I
Yeah.
had to be honest with myself, and I had to say, okay, what do you want? I've shared this story before. I went into Walmart and bought $300 worth of groceries, was about to, and got up to the register. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, there's nobody at the house. And I was like, I'll just pull out what I want. And I wound up leaving that cart right there in the store, because I could not pick out anything in that cart that was for me.
Yeah.
So just getting to that place of being honest with yourself, and really looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, okay, who is Kim? Not what does Kim do and how does she do it, but
Right.
who is Kim? What does that encompass? And so, like you said, that was the beginning of tearing down that wall, like you said, and creating that bridge.
Right.
So yeah, it was knocking down that wall. So that was that first thing. So that like you said, is huge. It's difficult, because you're really having to to be honest with yourself, and to really sit down with yourself. And sometimes we're just not comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that. Obviously, that's very personal, and that's how we learn, right? And that's how we grow. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we have these. We come here and we have a rule book, or a guide when we get here, then we lose it. And
Right.
that's a whole nother story for another day. But then we start picking up these other rules, and that's kind of going to lead us into the R, where we start, when we're younger, we get imprinted on from people around us of how you're supposed to act, and then you model. Your next phase is you model people around you that you respect, and you start saying, well, that's how I'm supposed to live this life. And then you socialize, and you get around your friends, and you go, well, I want to be like this, and I want to be like that, and you try to figure out life. And so a lot of your first 21 years is you're just figuring out who you are, but you're
Right.
also taking on who other people are, and you're making it how you are and who you are.
Right.
And so that's where the R comes in. So let's, be aware of your current situation. Now the R is removing limiting beliefs and negative emotions from the past that are holding you back. So, we have these, and I'm not going to go into this in detail. Like I said, please check out the other episodes. But if you learn something early on in life, like, well, I'm supposed to be like this, you're supposed to work yourself to the bone, or you're not supposed to make a lot of money, or what, all these things that get in the way that later on become beliefs, but you don't know where they're from, because they're ingrained in your blood. Rainier, a German writer, he talks about blood memories, and he
Mhm.
says that you live with these memories so long that they finally become part of you. They become your blood, and unfortunately, sometimes that blood is poisoned because it's information that is not true for you. And so that's the process I do with clients: is we remove those limiting beliefs, because they're limiting beliefs. We don't get rid of all your beliefs because that just doesn't make sense. But anything that's limiting you or holding you back, we get rid of. So that's that R, removing that. Then we move on to the I, identifying your core values and mission. And values are just that's what's important to you, or what your values are. So some people use values in a lot of different ways and they use it to try to finesse things. Values are what's important to you. And we all have values. So if someone tells you, oh, that political party doesn't have values, or that group of people doesn't have values, that's not true. They just have values that are different than what that person speaking is talking about. So you want to figure out what's important to you, gaining clarity on what truly matters. We spend a lot of our lives trying to please people, trying to fit in, because we are pack animals. And I'm sorry, but you have to understand that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, but we are having a human experience. And this skin we wear, these human animals, because we're animals, want to be part of the group, want to be part of the pack, because that's how you're protected. That's why being accepted is important to us, because if you're not accepted, you feel like you're getting kicked out of the pack. And millions and thousands and millions of years ago, that meant you didn't survive. So that's inherent, and we won't get deep in that, but that's what happens. But we identify with that. We identify with, well, this group that I want to be a part of says this is important, so it's going to be important to me.
Right.
But when we go through this process and we really want, and I'm here to guide you on your mission, getting to where you want to go and figuring out where you want to go, it's like, no, let's step back. What's important to you?
Right.
And that's the I, identifying your core values and your mission, getting that clarity, and there's ways to do it. SMART goals. In my world, the technical term, we have what's called an evidence procedure. And what that means for the non-jargonistic ones, that just means, how will you know when you achieved what you want? What will you see? What will you hear? What will you feel? And that's just a process that we do. And don't worry about that. But it's called evidence procedure. We could also elicit values, what's important to you, things of that nature. So we go through that process. Then we get to the D, and D is design a clear vision and strategy. So that's mapping out your path with practical steps. So it goes from strategy to tactics, as my military friends would say. Well, I'm a veteran, but just so you know. So you start looking, what are those actionable items we can do every day to get me to where I want to go? All this is doing is getting your mindset in a different direction, because it's very easy for us to be just human floating in lukewarm water. And if you watch our VAC tapes, episodes, you'll see me talk about that, where life is good enough. Things are okay. I have enough to pay my bills and then have $1 left over each month. My relationships, we don't argue all the time. Well, I have one or two close friends that I can call, whatever that looks like to you. And I'm not saying that's anyone's reality, but when we can, it's easy to go through life and beat enough because we have distractions.
Right.
We have the TV distractions, we have the sports distractions, we have all these distractions. That hobbies are good, but if it's taking you away from living your life, that's when we have to have that conversation and challenge,
Right.
in that.
Yes.
Then the G, and that's where we generate momentum and confidence, building on small successes to create lasting change. Celebrating the small wins. So you're on this path, you figured out where you're at, you're clearing out what's holding you back. You're saying, well, wait a minute, this is what's important to me. This is where I want to go. Now then you design that vision, and then you start going forward. Now you have to keep going forward.
Right.
And the easiest way to do that is taking action towards your goal and celebrating the small victories. We so often are like, well, I didn't achieve my final goal yet. Okay, that's good. And we're going to talk about why that's good in a minute with some technical stuff, but I promise you it's going to be fun. And that brings us, because we've gone through this journey now.
That's right.
And now this takes time. I'm going through it quickly tonight. We've talked about it on the other episodes. This journey can take time with clients. It just depends on where you're at and where you want to go and how big of a gulch is it. Are you, from, I used to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the San Mateo Bridge, I think, is like 9 miles long, going across the bay. That's a long bridge. There's a Dumbarton Bridge, it's a shorter bridge. You know, I mentioned earlier about going jumping the Grand Canyon. That's a really big bridge.
Right.
So depending on where you're going, coming from and going to, is how long it's going to take. So it's not a one and done of the sessions. It's going to take some time, but it's doable. And we keep, now you know how it's doable. You take action and you make it happen. And then we get to the E you're on the other side. You've pretty much accomplished your goal. You're in the neighborhood of where you want to be. You're walking down the street to the address, to the house, so to speak, that you want to be in, right? You get ready to
Right.
move in, and you embrace your purpose and your potential. And that's fully stepping into your authentic, empowered self. Okay. So how have before I jump into this next part, Kim, I really I love to have you here and I love your wisdom. So, has anything, as we've gone through these over the last 6+ months, has anything moved for you? Has this brought up anything for you, like, that you can personally take away? Even though, I mean, you've made so much progress. You're living your life, you're living your purpose, but anything that's shown up for you that's kind of been a eye opener?
Well, the one that really struck me early on was the R, when you're talking about
Right,
removing limiting beliefs, because it's so easy for us to be consumed by the environment that we're in,
right,
by those who have raised us. And I always talk about the book that I love the Four Agreements, because
right,
when you talk about the things that we agree to, you know like you said, we're pack animals, and so we're looking for acceptance. We're looking for people to do
right,
to validate us. And so sometimes what happens is, like you said, sometimes that blood is poisonous, and that is a huge thing of having to reverse some of those beliefs,
right,
and because we've taken them on. And you know I think as I've gone through my journey, I really had to determine, who is saying these things that I'm supposed to be, or their interpretation of who I am.
right,
How am I taking that and 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 believing that and saying, well, what's the source? What gives them the authority? About what authority can they speak these things about me? And then I'm not in a space where I can say, well, wait a minute, that's not so. I've just taken on what someone has told me, and
right,
and took it as true, or took it as a belief, and having to come out of that. I think about the times when I'm going through imposter syndrome,
right,
and where you're saying, you're thinking, oh, I can't do this, and really having to sit down and say, well, why is it that I feel that way? Why is it that I can't get past these things? So the biggest one for me that really resonated with me was that removing those limiting beliefs, and starting to come out of that, and starting
right,
to reverse some of those thoughts, because those things are so ingrained in who we are, or who we feel like we've been raised to be, or so much a part of the environment. And it
right,
really speaks to us having an open mind, and to having a mind shift.
right,
I'm getting away from that word mindset and getting into that word mind shift, like you said,
right,
because there's always going to be changes. There's going to be things that we're going to learn, and that we're going to experience, that's going to help us to to have a mind shift, and to begin to think of things in a more positive way. So that generating that momentum, being able to get to that place of generating that momentum and gaining that confidence once you got past it. So those two, the G and the R, have really resonated with me. Being able to sit there and say, I'm going to celebrate those wins, and that everything doesn't have to be this, grandiose experience, or, I can say, okay, I've moved the needle just a fraction towards, the
right.
best me that I'm looking to be, and I got to
Yeah,
be, and I'm okay with that.
yeah,
So those are the ones that really stood out to me, but they all have been wonderful, because just like I said, I love that bridge. I love saying that it was a wall, and as we've been knocking things down, it has become that beautiful bridge that I'm
right,
able to now. So where I couldn't see things, now, because that bridge is going, I mean, that wall is going down, I can now see. I can now begin to start making those strides in that direction. So,
Right.
this is
That's
it's been powerful. It's been
thank you.
powerful.
And now this, as we go into this step, the challenge here is that there's degrees to this work.
Yes.
And just as I said before, when I talked to my friend and she's like, I can't even hear what you're saying. Here comes the challenge now, because we're talking about the show, or in the show, we're talking about going through this whole process and getting to this end process. Now, I want to explain some things about what happens throughout this transformation journey and what happens at the end. And just know that if you're on your own journey right now, or you haven't started, or you've completed it, wherever you're at, this does pertain to you. And right now, it may not make as much sense. And it might be like, that's not true for me. And that's okay. I will say this, it's true. The information I'm going to share with you right now, it works. And this is not just, well, I read a book about it. I am honored and blessed to be able to work with people on a one-to-one basis over the last 15 years and see them change and see them transform and watch them. They do all the work. Like I said, I'm a tour guide, but I get to watch them shift. I get to be on the journey with them as they go from who they were to who they are now, and who they wanted to be and who they are. And just seeing those changes, I've experienced it. I went through my own, so I can speak to my own story. But as I'm sharing this, I also share that there's a lot of clients I've seen go through this. And so just know that regardless of where you're at right now, if it doesn't speak to you in this moment, just know that there is some truth in this. There is that. It might not be your truth right now, but I want to kind of step back from all of that, because I want to share some kind of global thoughts, things that this community has probably heard before, or maybe not, but a couple things to tie in, because here's the challenge. We're getting to what we're going to call the end. There's never a true end, but of getting to this new place, right? Because life is all about plateaus and then taking off again. And like I said about using the path of the mountain to the mountaintop, there's not a direct route up to the top of the mountain. You go here and you go here and you go here and here, and then, so that does show up. But I want to share a couple things, talking about this as we get to the end, so to speak, of this process. The first thing I'll say is this, and I'm quoting, it's a book called Transurfing. It's pretty deep, it's kind of heavy, but it's got some real wisdom in it. But it's been said in many ways, in different ways, and I'm going to say it in two different ways right now. But he talks about the world looks like how you see it. Okay? And what that means is that our world doesn't look a certain way, because, and we're not going to go deep here. I'm trying not to go complete science nerd here, because I love this stuff, and it's about quantum science, and about, they did that study 100 years ago, and they looked at light, and they measured light, and light would either be a wave, or what's the other one I'm looking for, and I just was thinking about it, a particle. And when they measured light as a wave, it showed up as a wave. And when they measured light as a particle, it showed up as a particle. And it's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be one or the other. Okay.
Right.
Now, for the science folks out there, I know the study, they might have done more and gone the other way, but that's the gist of it, is that how they looked at something was how it reacted. Okay. Same way with our world. You and I, Kim, maybe you come out this way to visit me, I go out that way to visit you. But if we're walking down the street and we see something happen, good or bad, you and I are both going to have different experiences around it.
Right.
And that's based on our filters and a lot of stuff that, talking about the removing limiting beliefs. There's a lot of things that go into that, but the world looks as you and I see it. Okay. And there's that great saying that Wayne Dyer got famous for it, but it was actually from a 1945 French philosopher. And he says that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Right.
And the reason I'm talking about these two quotes is because going through this process, you change. You lose a lot of the stuff that's holding you back. You start seeing life in a new way. And so now when you get towards this other side of the bridge, you are not the same person that started this journey. When you were back at be aware of your current situation has changed so much now when you get to this point that it might be a challenge for you, because we do two things. Well, we do a lot of things, but we have what's called a negativity bias. We're always looking for fires to put out. That's just this animal brain that we have. So we look for negative things. It's hard to see the positive sometimes,
Mhm.
but we also want to be consistent. And so when we're changing and we're becoming this new person, we might find, wait a minute, that's not who Jason is. Jason is this, like you said, I'm a mom, I'm a this, I'm a that, you know, beyond the I am, we add all that on there. But boy, we are sure about that, right? I know I am Jason. I know that. I'm 54 years old. I know my name is Jason. I am Jason, right? If someone came to me and said, "Oh, Jason, you actually turns out you were adopted and you were born, your name was Steven." My mom wanted to call me Steven. I don't know why. But you're actually Steven. I'd be like, "What are you talking about? I don't even understand that."
Right.
That's how that would be, right? So as people go through this journey, they might start to doubt themselves so they get to the end. So you have to know that, the other thing is, the other technical, they call it a dual mirror, that it acts as a direct reflection of how you are inside, your attitudes, your
Mhm.
beliefs, and your expectations. So your external world is reflecting how you feel inside, and how you feel inside is reflecting on the external world. So it's that dual mirror. It's both reflecting on each other. So as you've changed that now, you've changed who you are, you changed your attitudes, you changed your beliefs, you've changed your expectations. Because I don't guarantee a lot, but I guarantee if you go through this process and you work the process, when you get to the end, your expectations of life are going to be a lot different.
Right.
Because there's times when we doubt ourselves, we shortchange ourselves, we are happy enough, we're okay enough, whatever you're judging your life, your positive life about. We can get, like I said earlier, about person in lukewarm water, just floating, it's just good enough. But you go through this process and you start to discover, like, no, this is who I am, this is who I truly am. There could be a part of you that's like, come back, remember we were comfortable living this life.
Right.
Because change can be tough. Change is hard. But there's that cliche that says, everything, like, basically, I'm going to paraphrase, everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear, right?
Right.
Everything
Right.
you ever wanted is on the other side of discomfort.
Right.
Because discomfort is doing something. When we do something new, we get uncomfortable, right?
Right.
And that's just the reality. And sometimes it's easier to go back and put that blanket on and sit on the couch. And sometimes you have to say, no, that's not going to work. I do want to say one more little scientific thing. Okay. Talking about being an animal. There's a lot of talk in our world right now about hormones. We talk about
Mhm.
stress hormones, we talk about happiness hormones, and I have to say this just real quick. Our bodies are homeostatic beings. They want balance. Okay.
Yes.
So if you start taking pills to give you more testosterone, your body's going to stop making testosterone. And I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on this. There is truth in this, though. Okay.
Yes.
If you take steroids, of course, there's that balance. But what happens is then you need it more. It's kind of like an addict chasing that high. It's the
Right.
reality. Because your body stops, your receptors stop recepting as much, because they go, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem here. Same way with stress hormones. Stress hormones aren't bad. Let me tell you what, President John F. Kennedy had this disease, and I forget the name of the disease right now, but he didn't make enough cortisol. So he had to take pills,
Mm.
because if you don't have a stress hormone, you can't get off the couch. We call it a
Oh,
stress hormone, but it's activation. It's to take our body and to make movement. And like I said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not trying to be very super technical on purpose. I'm trying to bring
right.
this down to a different level to where we can just have it conversational. But so we talk about that. And the reason I mention all that is because dopamine. We talk a lot of, you'll hear talk about dopamine, the happiness hormone. It's a
Yeah.
neurotransmitter hormone that's in our bodies. Its key role is in the pleasure, motivation, and movement access in our brains. Okay. So, when they do test on little rats, and I apologize for those that might be a trigger for animal testing. Animal testing is, I don't support it. It's horrible. We have results from it, so that's why I do mention them sometimes in my work. I try to honor not talking about it as much as possible, but they'll do tests and they find out about how we respond and how our bodies respond to different chemicals and things of that nature, and what we go after. So and I'll explain a little bit more about dopamine. So the brain releases dopamine during pursuit to fuel action. So when you're moving towards your goal, you're getting those little dopamine bursts. So when you achieve something and you're moving forward, you get those little bursts of that feel good. Let's call it to simplify it. Those little feel good chemicals hit you, and you're like, "Ooh, I like this. I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to keep going towards my goal. I'm going to keep happy in that. Keep doing that." Okay. But here's the problem, and here's the challenge. Dopamine levels drop when your objective is fully reached, because it's not a reward for completing something, it's a reward for moving towards something. Okay, so here's one of the challenges. So you're going and you're moving and you're making things happen and you're like, yeah, I'm pumped, this feels great, and you're seeing changes in your life and your relationships are changing, and so there's so much more to it than just this is one small part I do want to talk about. The challenge is that when you finally complete it, that's why when you reach your goal, you can feel what they'll call flat sometimes, because your dopamine stops coming up, and it doesn't give you as much of a dopamine hit when you complete it. So you might achieved everything you wanted to achieve, and you're like, oh, I don't feel great about it. There's a couple reasons for that. There's psychology behind it, and there's actual the chemicals, the dopamine hit, right? And the psychology of it is that there's so much goes towards something. Now you achieve it, it might not be all that you wanted it to be. If I was only richer, if I was only skinnier, if I was only taller, if I was only whatever, the world would be amazing. And then you get skinnier, taller, richer, whatever, and you're like, oh, life is still life, you know? And kind of as an aside, in the Zen world, in the Buddhism Zen world, we say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right? Life, we live life, okay? The reason I mention that is that as we go through this process, we're adding on to it though. So I start with my clients where they're at, where they want to go, but through this process, we're still working towards kind of reaching their purpose, but it's also a process of discovery.
Right.
Because as you go through this process and you start to look through these new eyes and you start to see the world in a new way, possibilities that you didn't even imagine before start showing up. And you're like, wait a minute, I can do that. Wait a minute, I don't want to just do this, I want to do this. And so you keep going forward and you keep moving. So that's why it's so important to realize you work with the process, because things are going to change as you go through the process.
Yes. Wow. Now you see, it's so fascinating to me, and this is why I love these conversations, because you do think about that. You think about that whole dopamine, like you said, all the excitement of reaching that goal, and then when you get there, you kind of like, okay, now what? And I think about that even with my weight loss, things like that. You're thinking, okay, I've gotten there, but you know, we get so centered, or we get tunnel vision,
Right.
on making it to the destination, but we never think beyond that point. What happens once we reach there? Like you said, you stand around and and everybody's cheering, and you're like, yeah, and then everybody disperses, and you're just like,
Right.
okay, yeah, all the fanfare is gone, and so to get to that point where you're saying, okay, yes, I've done this, and now to be able to say, okay, now I can actually expand. I can
Right.
actually you know grow beyond this. I can actually see, because there's some limiting beliefs in what happens when we get to that quote unquote finish line.
Right.
We thought that that's all there is, but never realized until we got there, like you said, that there's more to discover, or we see more opportunities that we didn't see because we were possibly thinking small, if that makes sense. We were
Right.
thinking, oh, because we were thinking that that's all that we can do. There, we never even imagined anything else being beyond there. And so it's interesting that you bring that point, because it is. We get there and then we're looking around and trying to figure out what's to do, and not realizing that there's so much more. Like you said, you get to the other side of the bridge and you realize there's a whole nother forest, or there's a whole nother landscape there
Right.
that we didn't even consider. So, I mean, that's something you just blew up. This now has become my my favorite letter, the E, because it's just like you don't think about those things. You think about the
Right.
little thing, but you don't think that there's going to be anything beyond that point. Or for certain people, we don't ever think we're going to reach there, so we never think beyond that, because we
Right.
never in our heart of hearts think that we're going to make it there.
Right.
And that's something I even talk about in my weight loss. When I lost the weight, the 64 pounds, I was like, oh snap, now I never thought I was going to make it.
Right.
But I was doing all of the things that were going to help me get there,
Right.
and I still, in my heart of hearts, didn't think I was going to make it. And then when I got there and the clothes weren't fitting and everything, I was like, uh-oh, now what am I going to do? Because somewhere in our heart of hearts, we don't think we're actually going to get there, so we don't think beyond that,
Right.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And
Wow.
and some folks might look at this conversation tonight and go, "Oh, you mean it's never over? Like I never am going to hit that?" That's not true, because
It's not.
here's the deal. You don't have to set a new goal. You get to set a new goal.
Mm.
You change that focus, you change that thinking, and it's like, "Whoa, oh wait a minute. I don't have to do it, but I get to do it. I have opportunity to keep growing. And that's why we're here. That is why we're here on this planet doing this thing, living this experience, is that to keep growing, to get expanding. I always tell folks, this universe we live in, they've proven it many times, is
Mm.
expanding.
Yeah.
Expanding into what? Who knows? That's a little scary. Let's not talk about that. But it's expanding. So why would we shrink? We are
Right.
part of this universe, so we get to keep expanding. And I'm going to say this. We don't have a ton of time left, but I do want to say this,
Sure.
okay? Because as we wrap up this portion of our talks, we find a lot of goals. And I work with folks, and we have a lot of goals to live that purpose to whatever. And they say that the meaning of life is the meaning you give it.
Yes.
That's it. But the reality is this: we're working towards these tangible goals, these goals we can see, these goals we can feel, these goals we can measure, but ultimately we're looking for peace. And if you find peace at any point in time, you can still do more, but you've achieved it. Okay. All these other goals, all this living this purpose, are to move you towards a direction of living a full life, because the theory is that living a full life will lead you to peace. Right. And it's not sitting in a cave, meditating for 14 hours a day. Some folks do that.
Right.
I want to be out here with you. I want to be having conversations with you in this community, and talking and living and enjoying this planet and figuring things out, and all that, and finding my peace.
Yeah.
And if you're stuck in your life, you're not going to find peace. You're not going to find, all spirituality, all philosophy, all religions talk about taking this journey and this path to enlightenment. Buddha
Mhm.
sat under a tree, Jesus had his
Mhm.
journey, and to get that enlightenment. That's what we're doing. We're on this journey, we're on this path, and this path is our path, and this path is taking us to our peace. And
Yeah.
even bigger, and I love that I can talk the spiritual side, the religious side, the spiritual side with you for sure in
Yes.
your community, is connecting to source. And that's about reconnecting to source. And the more we expand, the closer we get to that. And that's where we find our peace, is when we remake that connection and we fully live that
Yeah.
connection.
Yes, I absolutely love that. One of my favorite things to say is that, I help people to cope. And that's the acronym for create our peaceful existence. It's
Exactly.
about creating peace. Now, I love that you say that because it's true. It is about finding peace. It is about, lightening your enlightening yourself and your path so that you can get to that space of peace, and what that means to you. And like you said, for some of us, that means, that connection with source, that connection with our spiritual being,
Mhm.
but also, like you said, understanding that we have a physical body that is here. When you talk about homeostasis and those things, where we're talking about how we're allowing our bodies to experience these things, that make us human and allow us to be able to exist on this plane,
Right.
but still having that connection to source, into that higher spiritual being that we are. So, again, it's creating that entire wholeness of who we are.
Hmm.
And so I absolutely love this. But like you said, it all comes down to peace, creating our peaceful existence, coping in this environment, in this space that we're in.
Right.
You know, this
Yeah.
is this amazing. This is amazing. All right. One thing that I definitely want to share with those who have been watching, going across the bottom of the screen has been information on how to both be in contact with myself, my YouTube channel, so you can go back and look at some of the episodes that you may have missed. But also there is information on how to get in contact with Jason, www.onepathhealing.com. So that way you can connect with him and be able to take the steps that you may need to take in order to be a part of the bridge technique and to also find out more about his products and services. So I didn't want to let the time go by without letting people know to remember, check out what's going along the bottom of the screen there and connect with us. So that way you can begin to experience, tearing down those walls and building the bridges in your life. So with that, I'll let you wrap things up for us. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners before we go?
The one thing I've said before, and I just think it's so true, and everyone that hears this, it might not be ready to hear it, but they say that the challenge in life is that we are perfect as we are, and we're
Mm,
getting better. And
yeah.
so know that where you're at in your life right now is where you're at in your life right now. And there's no reason to beat yourself up. There's no reason to be angry. There's no reason to be upset with yourself. Just the reality is that you are at where you're at, and you have the skills and you have the ability to improve that moment. And it doesn't have to be external. So just know that it starts with compassion for yourself, and say, you know what, I am doing the best I can with what I've got right now, and maybe I'll talk to somebody. Maybe I'll do something different tomorrow that'll take me towards where I want to go. And that's how it all begins.
That's how it all begins. All right. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, Jason, again for sharing space with me. It's always a pleasure. It fills my heart with joy. I hope that you all, if there's anything that you missed, go rewind it back. Get your notebook and your pen and pad out and write down some things. That's what I do all throughout the shows. You'll always see me looking off to the side because I'm always writing something, because it's so important that we expand and open our minds. Just like you said everything that we've ever wanted is on the other side of discomfort. And sometimes we have to just be able to stretch beyond that. But just like when we have that shirt that may be a little too tight, and we start to pull at it a little bit until it just looks a little bit. Then we go, oh, okay, I think I can wear this. We're
Love it.
always looking to stretch. We're always looking
Yeah.
to go put that leotard on and stretch it out. Put that bodysuit on, that wetsuit on, and stretch it out until it begins until you become more comfortable in it. Be
Exactly.
comfortable in your skin,
Yeah.
because this is the vessel that we've been given, but we also been given a spiritual body, and we're looking to make those connections that way we are in that space of creating our peaceful existence. So again, thank you so
Yeah.
much for being with me, Jason, and thank you all for joining us on this edition of the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. And until we see you all the next time, I say peace.